Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and today we have our guest, legislator Shannon Zimmerman. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Jamie, always a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
That's right, and you are our District 30 representative, and you've been elected to how many terms? Is this your third now?
This is my third term, Jamie.
All right. Good. And we've had you on as both candidate and as legislator. So today we're finally out of an election season, and hopefully you guys are getting some things done in Madison. But the problem is we just don't hear about it up here in St. Croix County and the River Falls, Hudson area that you represent. So that is our purpose of our interview today is what's happening, what things are getting tackled. I know the big 500-pound gorilla in the room is the budget, and you've been hard at work on Joint Finance Committee, traveling around the state, conducting hearings, and trying to, hash out something that's going to, work for and actually get passed. So, where are we at? When did we start, and what's been accomplished thus far? Let's start there.
So good place to start. So I'll start with the process, and then I'll give you kind of an assessment of our current position and where I feel we're at. So the Wisconsin budget process goes as follows. Generally, in February of the year following the election, the governor will put together what is his proposal for a budget. Now, that proposal is preceded by requests from all agencies. So, for example, the Department of Public Instruction will have their request, DNR will have their request, on and on and on. And these can be really big numbers, all things in between, any policy things that they would like to see change, because we do have the ability in the Wisconsin budget to also invoke policy changes, legislative changes, should that be necessary. So in February, the budget is received by the Joint Committee on Finance. As a state representative, there are 6 of us on the Assembly side who are appointed by the Speaker to serve on the Joint Committee of Finance. I feel very fortunate that I am one of those 6. And I also would argue that it is advantageous for Hudson and River Falls and Roberts, because you have a voice in the room and at the table. Doesn't mean I win all the time. I don't. But you have a voice at the table, and it's not maybe Southeast Wisconsin representatives making decisions for what is our Western Wisconsin region there. So the governor releases his budget, and then Legislative Fiscal Bureau, think of them as our CPAs in government, our finance people. They take the next probably month generally, and they do an exhaustive analysis of the governor's proposal, and they translate that into very specific budgetary topics that will be then debated and voted on by the Joint Committee on Finance. So the month goes by. During that time, or near the end of it, we, the Joint Committee on Finance members, we travel the state, and we participate. We host public hearings. And this was unusual this cycle for sure because of COVID. There are sensitivities, and rightfully so there. But we hear from people. Every person gets 2 minutes on the mic to tell us what's on their mind, what they think, what they love, what they hate, etc. That finishes, actually, I'll quickly answer that finishes tomorrow. That's our last one, is a virtual one via Zoom for anybody who didn't feel comfortable meeting in person. And then we will begin that budgetary process in earnest next week in the finance meeting. So Legislative Fiscal Bureau has finished their work. I'm ready to go. I think the team is ready to go here and start to put the budget together. In terms of schedules, generally, the Wisconsin objective is to have the budget signed on or around the 4th of July. So that's the process. Okay, now very quickly, let me just give you a sense of where we're at. We've heard some good things while we were on the road. We visited Whitewater, Rhinelander, Menominee, saw a lot of Hudson and River Falls people who took the time to come over and be heard. And naturally, Jamie, people reach out to our office. There's been a lot of discussion inside the Capitol around key budget areas. I'll say, themes, right? Every company has kind of maybe key strategies or themes. State government's not all that different. We have some key themes, and I'll touch on them later, I'm sure, in the course of this conversation. So that's where we're at now, and that covers the process.
Okay. Well, let's go to those. When you heard these people testify in these 2-minute speeches, what seems to be the plurality of comments, I guess, if not majority? I don't know if you can.
Yeah. So one of the things I drew a tactic I used in my private sector business, which I kind of have a makeshift heat chart that I create when I'm at these sessions. And a person may come up and their topic may be education, right? Higher ed, K-12, whatever the case is, and they're passionate. And I kind of keep my heat chart to try and pattern out what's important in some of these regions. There were some trends and some observations. So, for example, hugely so, we heard everywhere across the state, and my office has been contacted substantially on the expansion and enhancement and dramatic improvement of broadband and accessibility across the state of Wisconsin. As you know, COVID forced students, teachers, even healthcare through telehealth was now thrust into a world of broadband accessibility, private sector business, and we revealed a major gap in the state of Wisconsin that we just couldn't absorb. I mean, we weren't prepared for this, right? Many states maybe weren't. So broadband was one that we heard substantially. Education, healthcare, all, I would say, big topics. One that surprised me a little bit, we heard a lot about, was criminal justice reform. That was something that came up. Now, some of these people travel and follow us around a little bit, so you'll hear it again, and we recognize that. But that was maybe I'll say in the 4th and 5th category. But that was something that kind of stuck out in my mind. Okay.
Well, let's start with broadband because, as you know, I've been doing these interviews for a long while, and at least before you were a candidate, so at least 5-6 years, there's been talk about broadband investment.
Yep.
So if it's so important to northern Wisconsin and rural areas in the state, why hasn't it happened? What's blocking it from getting done?
Okay, so a couple things. First of all, I think you may know this, I have a technology background. So the understanding of all of the different options, and we do have different options when it comes to high speed accessibility within the state. Here's a couple of things that, in my opinion, are happening. First of all, if I look back at the last 2 budgets, to Wisconsin's credit, it has increased investment in broadband each budget. And the last one was its largest. I think we added $40 million in broadband. And no one maybe saw COVID. In fact, no one did see COVID coming. But I think that there's a couple competing things that have been difficult. Number one, there are different schools of thought in terms of which technology should prevail. Should it be fiber optic? Can we absorb fiber optic installation in some of the rural areas of the state of Wisconsin? Should it be satellite? We have Elon Musk talking about, these hyperspeed satellite options that may one day exist. Can it be point-to-point connections, right? Where we use existing infrastructure like our electrical poles, and then we run fiber to the poles and use a point-to-point system from the house to the power line. So the point there is there's been some competing positions on technology. The other one, funding. That's just a simple answer there. Not because people don't want to, probably because there are other things in the interpretation, maybe. There's higher priorities with our state taxpayers' money in the past. This situation, the period that we are operating in, has, like I said, put a spotlight on this right now.
Yes. And you mentioned that last. So I get the fact that maybe the manner of or mode of technology is one of the disputes. But when it comes to funding, the federal government has just opened the spigot wide open for states. And as long as it's related to COVID relief, which I can't see a better connection between broadband and COVID relief. Yeah. So why isn't there enough money coming out of the $5 billion that Wisconsin's getting
Yeah.
to get this done? Because $5 billion is a lot more than $40 million that was stuck in broadband last.
Unbelievable, right? So first of all, let me comment. The money at the federal level, we can all debate at some point down the road, but the reality, in my opinion, is this. That money is on the face of a grandchild I haven't met yet. It's on their credit card. And so I kind of look at that and say, we have to be as strategic as we possibly can be with the use of funds and use of those proceeds. They have to be used on things that, certainly address the current needs and the challenges that we have, but also ideally, just as we would in business, deliver a return. Broadband, in my opinion, Jamie, is one of the greatest places we can deliver that return. For example, the governor wants to up it, and even the legislature recently, he had a proposal for $250 million, and the legislator sent a bill to his desk for $500 million. I'm not sure $500 million is enough, but it's not too far off. I believe it is feasible that we can reach gigabyte service across the state of Wisconsin, and we need to make that a number one priority. And here's another reason why. Real estate values, home values go up when you have high-speed broadband. Companies will locate or relocate to the state of Wisconsin when the backbone and the infrastructure is in place and can support high-speed internet. Rural parts of Wisconsin, which we all hear all the time, are suffering because people are moving to more of the urban areas for employment. They too would benefit. And let's not forget our kids and our faculty. When we have high-speed capabilities, our ability to deliver educational materials locally in Hudson or in rural parts of Sawyer County or Burnett County are dramatically improved. So if you ask me, if there ever was a time where a one-time use of funds, and that's what we're talking about here, because one of the things we will hear frequently in the budget process is, if you're making an investment in some areas, is it a one-time investment or is it ongoing? Because if it's ongoing, government just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is a concern for a lot of people. This is a one-time use of funds. We have the money there. When the first CARES Act came out, I appealed to the governor's office, asking him, pleading with him, please, let's invest it here. And I'm not here to cast a judgment one way or the other. The governor's got a lot of things on his plate. He's got a lot of things to figure out. Mm-hmm. But I would agree with you, Jamie. I believe we should make it a goal to have gigabyte service across the state of Wisconsin with these one-time funds.
Okay, let's go to the second area then. You mentioned education.
Yeah.
And the problem with the education and, again, these continuing dollars in the budget is that there's always a fight. It's kind of a zero-sum game, and K-12 gets pitted against, postgraduate, like our state university system and the VOTEC. So what's different this time in education, and what are you hearing as far as some of the refrains? I mean, I remember back when I ran for your position back in '96, so that's 25 years ago, and there was an incredible underfunding of special education. That percentage of what the state's supposed to be picking up has gone down, and even over that 25 years. So maybe that's a suggestion of one area, but what are the other, besides, in addition to special education, what might be some of the hot spots in education?
So I'm just one guy, and this is just going to be my opinion. So here goes. I look at the pandemic phase that we hopefully are now exiting. I think we're all very optimistic and hopeful. And when I look at education, and let's just break it down into higher education, which in my definition includes technical colleges and universities within the state of Wisconsin, and then K-12. When I think about the student population there, to me, K-12 is and needs to be the focus group for us right now. And I hope, I'm not taking away from universities or higher education at all. Children are in their most formative years in that K-12 period. And they've had to struggle with tremendous unpredictability, as we all have. And we need to get them back in the classroom. Period. And locally, and I know Hudson did a great job, River Falls, all of our local schools did a good job, but that's not true statewide. We have some schools and some districts, Jamie, that are still not in. They haven't been in forever. We need to reverse that quickly. So I believe that is a priority. You mentioned special education. Special education, and I wasn't a budget expert on school funding prior to, and probably still not, but prior to coming to the legislature. So what happens is you receive per pupil aid, and when special education funding is not sufficient enough for a local school's needs, you end up having to do a transfer, right? You would know that as well as anybody. Last budget cycle was the first time, and I didn't agree with the years before, was the first time in, I think it was 8 or 10 years, that we sent funding deliberately to special education. Prior to serving in the legislature, I did not have an appreciation for those with disabilities in our communities, those with various special needs, and certainly special education. And not that you follow my bills, I've had a number of bills passed and signed by Governor Evers, Governor Walker, all in this category because my eyes have been opened up to the challenges that you are facing. So it would be my opinion that although we finally made an investment in special education last cycle, that will be an area that once again probably sees it and sees, I'd like to see it increased. I have toured Hudson School in River Falls, and I've heard firsthand from faculty and administration about the challenges that creates. And if it's not dealt with sooner, we're going to pay more in the long run anyway. And it's not good for the student, which is more important than that. So I'm hearing, as it relates to education, there's the magic 2/3 funding. I'm sure you're familiar with that label. I believe that there is an absolute receptivity to getting the 2/3 funding and increasing the investment in special education. We'll find out for certain in the coming weeks, but I would say the mood is leaning that direction, in my opinion, right now.
Okay, good to hear. Now, further down the list, healthcare and criminal justice reform. So let's take healthcare first. Other than just more money, we've had this refrain from the folks that are on the other side of the aisle from your party and saying, just take the federal money for Medicare and Medicaid, and that would relieve our state budget in these areas. How is that argument going to change with these COVID relief funds?
Yeah. So first of all, I have spoken with everyone who would be involved in that process, right? From our medical providers, medical device pharmaceutical companies who are also an integral part of that equation, insurance companies who are a part of that equation, managed care organizations who are kind of a middle layer that dictates pricing and some of the different things that get done. And my conclusion is this, right? So if we expand Medicaid, what we're doing is we're in essence putting more people into that, for lack of a better label, the welfare category. Now, here's the problem. The healthcare providers, our local hospitals and clinics that provide these services, they provide to private insurance patients and they provide to public insurance patients. On the public side, Medicaid, they get paid 60 cents on every dollar for the services. So it's just the way it is. So if they start to see a disproportionate increase in that, what ends up happening is they start to lose and hemorrhage money. Well, where are they going to get it? They're going to have to go back to the private side and increase prices and so forth. To me, I would love to see this argument go away, but here's the only way that I can conceive of that happening at some point in time. First, there are so many broken parts in this process. Throwing more federal money at a broken system is just wasting money. Let's fix the system, and maybe this is idealistic of me, but costs. In our home budgets, in our business budgets, when we have an imbalance in the checkbook, right? We can look at the source of revenue coming in and its sustainability, because don't forget, Medicaid's kind of a one-time pop and there you go, and now you're on your own, but the effects of the policy remain. We need to attack the cost structure. We need to heighten competition, because competition drives pricing levels down across any business sector. Healthcare is no different. We need to remove layers of inefficient bureaucracy that have existed, in my opinion, now for decades, that take I visited a nursing home in Hudson, and they try to hire CNAs, okay? At the time they could pay, this is a couple years ago, right? They could pay $10 an hour, Jamie. It's pretty hard to find a CNA that's going to work in Hudson, Wisconsin for $10 an hour where they can go down the street and go to Quick Trip for 16. This is wrong. And we got grandma and grandpa, and we don't want to take care because we're all going to get there, hopefully, at some point in time. So what I would later discover is that those prices are preset by managed care organizations. And that is another opportunity for us to do a better job, take a layer of cost out potentially, and see more of as a percentage of our healthcare tax money get to that nursing center in Hudson, Wisconsin, rather than being gobbled up by a couple different layers of people providing service that is no longer necessary in this equation. So I gave you a long answer. The short version, in my opinion, is this. Taking the Medicaid expansion is an illusion. It's a one-time pop that will actually result in an increase in costs after the fact. Arizona, as one example, when they took the expansion, they saw a 300% increase in hospital emergency department visits. The cost went through the roof. Why? Because it's just easy. I can go there and I can just get care through the emergency department. That's the most expensive form of healthcare on the planet. So right. There's better things that we can and should be doing there to address the healthcare issues, and they are legitimate. We need to fix this, but it will be more than the state, Jamie. It's going to need our federal government to also take action.
All right, but if we're denying, if we're not going to take the federal money, then so then the state, how does a person that's not qualifying for that care now, how are they going to get health care?
So first of all, every single person. Okay, so the way the state formulas work is you have a percentage over the federal poverty level. I think it's 138%. You qualify for what's called Badger Care in the state of Wisconsin. So number one, every man, woman, and child in the state of Wisconsin has access to healthcare. They go by region. So let me use, it's called the Silver Plan. All right. So based on your income level, if you're on Badger Care and you live in, and I think they run this out of Eau Claire County, or that's the Western region, your monthly insurance cost is $15 a month for the Silver Plan. And there's a minimal deductible there. So, and that would carry you up until the point where you would go to the open market, to the Obamacare plan, if you will, depending upon your income level. So first of all, every person has access to health care coverage in the state of Wisconsin. The next part of your question is, okay, so from a state's perspective, we do have to provide GPR monies, general purpose revenues towards health.
Oh.
Close any deficits or gaps there.
Wait, Shannon, there we froze when you were given, you were talking about that general
purpose revenues.
Yes, purpose revenues. Pick it up from there.
Okay, I'm very sorry. So see, even the Capitol needs improved Wi-Fi. So the state will have to contribute some GPR, general purpose revenues, towards healthcare for those who are lower income earners on the Badger Care system, and also to some providers, because some of our providers who do see the disproportionate Medicaid spend also are struggling substantially right now. So I anticipate we will once again in this budget, and likely increase because both state and federal monies increase in healthcare coverage and monies across the state of Wisconsin.
Well, isn't this similar to the broadband issue where it's the urban folks saying, what problem with internet is there? We've got all we need, and yet the rural areas are the ones who are don't have that gigabyte service and so forth. Isn't that similar to healthcare? Because the young people are all going to the urban areas, and our rural areas are aging faster because those people are less likely to move from the home they've been in for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, a couple things, right? I read an article recently which was profiling the millennial, right? And you're right. The millennials, by and large, gravitate to urban areas for a variety of reasons. But the article, interestingly, pivoted and near the backside, as they said, as the millennials now begin their family years, they're moving back to, what I'm going to call, God's country, right? Some of the great communities across the state of Wisconsin. So we'll have to watch that to see if that trend continues. But you're right. I mean, we've passed. I voted for legislation that provided some tax incentives for physicians healthcare providers to go out to other parts of the state. We need them there, and it's helpful to them, provide some incentive, but most importantly, gets healthcare professionals in the regions that we need them in the state. And so I think that both legislatively, there are things that we can be doing, and budgetarily, there are things that we can and should be doing, but you shouldn't have to negotiate on your healthcare.
Right. Well, we just touched on three subjects: broadband, education, healthcare. They're really kind of some of the primary bases for quality of life, particularly in rural areas. The fourth area that you mentioned, though, criminal justice reform, that probably affects far less than 10% of the people in the state. So why should that be any kind of priority in this next biennium budget?
That's a good question. Here's what I think. The reason it should be looked at, couple-fold. One, it is a monstrous part of our budget. Department of Corrections is not a trivial spend. It is in the billions of dollars in the state of Wisconsin. And I want to make sure I preface this statement with the following. I will not negotiate on the safety of our families and our children in our neighborhoods, in our district. That's non-negotiable, right? We will always, I am a firm believer, our local law enforcement, they're outstanding. We have exceptional examples across our area. But there's the expense side of it, Jamie, where those monies, if we're doing things more efficiently, if we're not we disproportionately incarcerate more than, say, the state of Minnesota, and our demographics are strikingly similar. Why is that? There was truth in sentencing and some things that were done. We have a number of people that are incarcerated on, for lack of a better label, petty crimes and so forth. So we heard from a lot of people across the state. Some were just passionate that they felt that there were some that went to the extreme that said we should do away with prisons, and I'm not there. But I think that there's an opportunity financially to realize some recovery and gain there that could be deployed elsewhere. There's a lot of people that find themselves involved in the criminal justice system for, let's just imagine for a moment, a dumb decision. And they wear the scarlet letter for the rest of their days. Now they go to get employed and they struggle to get employed. And when they're not employed, where do they go and what do they do? And we need these people, many of them. So I think that there are good arguments to be made in terms of why we should be looking at that area of the budget. And it will be an area that certainly does get looked at. But I think
I'm curious, those people that are coming to give the speeches at the public hearings, are they advocating for more funding to go into criminal justice or less funding?
So the interesting thing, a lot of the people, I would say the majority of the people that visited our public hearings are advocating for the closure of a number of our prisons and the release of a number of our prisoners. And for each of them, the basis could be very different, right? They all have their reason for wanting that. My colleagues, and I share the same opinion, we have to be incredibly thoughtful in this category, because in no way, shape, or form, like I said, do we compromise the safety or the quality of life that we have in Hudson and River Falls. We can't do that. So I think their motivation is that some of them are maybe just believers that the time for incarceration is come and gone. That's their opinion.
Before we leave that area, because we only have a minute left, but I am curious because it can have a huge budgetary impact. Colorado saw that when they legalized marijuana and several other states, because then once it was legal, they could tax it, regulate it, and so forth, became a good revenue source for the state, and all of a sudden they were spending a lot less money on cops enforcing small drug offenses and then going through the court system. So lots of potential savings there. Is that something that's likely to be part of the budget, or is that going to have to be its own separate discussion? And do you see it going anywhere in the next biennium?
Good question. So I have publicly said that I have no objections to medical marijuana, and we prescribe other drugs. I don't understand why that would be different if it's prescribed by a physician. So just so you know what has been my public opinion on that. I reached out to Colorado legislators, to Washington state legislators, because I wanted to get the answer from them, because I've read the same things you probably have, right? It's a windfall. And Couple thoughts. First, I did hear, there was a windfall, but then there was also an offset and an increase in expenses that followed a year and the second year later, right? There was other sort of things. I think a lot's been learned on that category. I'm of the opinion that I think legalization, both medically and maybe for recreational purposes, is not an if it's going to happen, Jamie. I'm of the opinion I think it's a when. I do know across the legislature, there are mixed opinions. There's not, I don't believe there's the votes there quite yet, but I think that this is a subject this is a subject that is not going away. And I think that we will see it at some point in time. I just think that we have to make sure we've gone to school because there were these legislators, Democrat and Republican, to tell me, all that glitters isn't gold. There's some things you're going to have to deal with as well as a part of this. But by gosh, let's go to school on these people, apply what they've learned, and do it better.
All right, very good. Well, we are at the end of our 30 minutes. I really appreciate it. It flies by. But I would wish you well for what you have to do over the next 2 full months and to get this thing ready and to be sent to the governor and get signed towards the end of June, early July. I hope it happens. But in the meantime, I want to also extend the invitation. You can come to, our work sessions are towards the end. We just had one on Monday night, last night, for our school board, and we would love to have you come over, either of the next couple months before this process is done.
Yeah, be assured. I think you may recall I did this last budget. When we get into the K-12 budget, I am on the phone with the superintendents on, a very frequent basis. I know what the schools are looking for. I do. And I think that I will be cautiously optimistic at this point, Jamie. It's never done until it's done. I know you know that, but we have great schools and we have exceptional kids, and both need to be back in those classrooms.
Excellent. Well, with that, we'll end our session, and thank you, Representative Zimmerman, for being on. It's always good to see you. Again, good luck down there in Madison, and I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. Please reach out if you have anything more to say. You can always contact Representative Zimmerman's office. It doesn't have to be just during public hearings either. So
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, because we do encourage that.
Very good. And thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.